On June 13, 1994, in San Antonio, Texas, the Barclay family called the police and told them that their son Nicholas was missing. Immediately, the investigation began. The police learned that Nicholas was last seen at the basketball court with his friends, and that he was supposed to return home with his brother Jason. Remember that name well, Jason. Jason said that for some reason, Nicholas told him to go and he would come back shortly. But then he completely disappeared. The police continued to search and investigate for several months, but the young man disappeared, and no one saw him again. Everyone believed that he was dead until 3 years after his disappearance. The police contacted the Barclay family and told them, "Your son Nicholas is alive and is now in Spain, but he has partial amnesia. We need one of you to travel there and identify him." The very next day, his sister traveled to identify him and confirm whether he was her brother or not. When she saw him, she swore that he was her brother. They brought him back from there, and the family received their lost son with the warmest welcome. Everyone was convinced that this was Nicholas, and everything went well. However, the disaster and surprise that no one expected was that the person who was with them in the house now was not their son Nicholas, and he was not an ordinary person. Rather, he was a chameleon-like criminal who had dazzled the whole of Europe. Interpol had been pursuing him for years. For those who are seeing me for the first time, welcome from inside the event. I talk about everything strange and mysterious on planet Earth. Today I will tell you the story of a criminal who was able to impersonate 500 personalities during his life and deceive 2 entire continents. He is Frederic Bourdin, or as he is called, the Chameleon of Color. Frederic was born in 1974 in a small village called Nanterre in the suburbs of Paris. He lived with his mother for the first 3 years of his life, but his mother knew nothing about honor, as she was busy with her illicit relationships to the point that she did not know who Frederic's father was. Therefore, she gave him to her parents to raise him, and Frederic grew up with his grandparents. Life with his grandparents wasn't much better, but at least he had someone to take care of him. He stayed with them until he was 15. At that age, he discovered his strange talent. When he was 15, he was telling everyone that his father was a British intelligence agent and that his mother had died in a car accident, so he lived in his grandparents' house. What distinguished Frederic was that he didn't just lie, but he believed the lie and lived it to the point that he made those around him believe it. When he was 16, Frederic entered the juvenile detention center in the Mosham area, the same area where he lived with his grandparents, due to his involvement in fraud and theft. But instead of repenting in prison, things developed with him more, and he began to train in new skills that made him a super actor. In prison, he was their madman. Every day or two, he would fall to the ground, convulse, pretend to have epilepsy, and faint. As soon as he opened his eyes, he would ask those around him, "Who am I? Where am I?" and pretend to have lost his memory. A few days later, oh my God, his memory would return by itself. Sometimes he would pretend to be crazy. The strange thing was that everyone believed everything he said. They believed him to the point that they took him to the hospital to treat him as if he were really crazy, or had lost his memory, or had epilepsy. Even the doctors there could not discover his deception. All he wanted was to go to the hospital so he could escape, and he did succeed in escaping. But if only he had not escaped. After escaping, he went to Paris. There he thought that the only way to live a decent life was to move to Britain. With all politeness and calm, as if he had done nothing, he went to the police station in Paris and told them, "My name is Jimmy Seal, a young British man lost here, and I would like your help to return to my family home." But as soon as the policeman started speaking to him in English, Frederic fell silent and did not make a sound, because he did not know a single word of English. Then they discovered the lie, arrested him, revealed his true identity, and sent him back to prison. But this time, they put him in a prison in Paris. There, he repeated the same tricks and laughed at everyone again. They took him to the hospital after he deceived the doctors again, and he managed to escape again after spending 2 years in prison. It doesn't matter how he escaped from prison. What matters is what he did after his escape. During his time in prison, Frederic got to know Spanish and American prisoners, and he was able to master English well and Spanish reasonably well. After his release from prison, he continued to impersonate characters until he was exposed repeatedly and became wanted in all of France. Then, his face became known and his secret was exposed, so he decided to escape to the border and traveled to Spain on foot. There, he started a new life with new characters. At that time, the perfect opportunity came that he had been waiting for to fulfill his dream of traveling to America. At that time, the year was 1997, and a magazine fell into his hands that talked about the story of two missing teenagers in America. Teenagers were Frederic's playground. While flipping through the missing persons photos, he saw a photo of a teenager who had been missing for 3 years and 4 months, named Nicholas Barclay. Who was Nicholas? He was the teenager I told you about at the beginning of the story. Frederic saw that there was a slight resemblance between him and Nicholas, so he researched the subject further and collected additional photos of Nicholas. The problem was that Frederic had brown eyes, a light complexion, and black hair, while Nicholas had blue eyes, blonde hair, and fair skin. The other thing was that Nicholas had 3 tattoos on his body. But for Frederic, these problems were no problem. That same day, he went to a tattoo artist and asked her to draw him the same tattoos that Nicholas had. Frederic dyed his hair blonde and decided that the eye color issue would be solved later. Now he called the police and told them he was a lost American and said, "Let's see what happens." When he called them, he said, "I'm a young teenager named Nicholas Barclay, lost and in need of help. I'm from the United States of America, and I have lost my memory. I only remember my name and a few simple things. Please contact the relevant authorities to help me and find a way to get back to my family." After he ended the call, he waited a little while to see if the police believed the story or not. Then he called them an hour later, and during that time, the police contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and indeed, it turned out that he was right, and that there was a missing teenager by that name. When he contacted them again, it was clear that they believed the story, and everything was going according to plan. At that moment, Frederic decided to turn himself in. When he went to them and turned himself in, the news turned the world upside down. They immediately transferred him to the American embassy, where he was treated better. The next day, his sister came to identify him, and what a surprise. When she saw him, she said, "I knew I would see you again." She swore that he was her brother. As for the color of the eyes, here's the story. Frederic had calculated this point carefully. When they interrogated him at the embassy, he told them that he was a victim of an organ trafficking gang. He started crying as he told them how they put a corrosive substance on his eyes, which caused the color of his eyes to disappear. Because of this, his eyes turned brown. He told them that he had gone through many experiences that he could not remember the details of, but he could not forget the pain he had gone through. He also added that his American accent had become bad as a result of what he had been through. After the embassy confirmed that the person in front of them was Nicholas, they gave him an American passport and took him and his sister to Texas. There, the family celebrated his reception in the best way, and they continued in this way for about a year. During this entire year, no one suspected his identity, and everyone treated him as the real Nicholas. But the one thing that Frederic was always afraid and worried about was the appearance of the real Nicholas at any moment. But this possibility was impossible for him, because Nicholas had disappeared 4 years ago and was certainly dead. What helped Frederic even more was that Nicholas' mother had given him her son's diary and everything related to him. In addition to a box that contained all of her son's memories, Frederic had memorized everything about Nicholas and had supernaturally assumed his personality, and he had prepared himself to live with this personality forever. But everything began to go wrong when an FBI investigator intervened, who ruined his plan. After Fred arrived in America, he tried in every way to avoid the investigation. He went to therapy sessions, claiming that he was trying to recover his memory. These sessions were scheduled to last several months. But Fred was smart. He took full advantage of the situation and showed everyone that he was not getting better in treatment. He continued treatment for a year. and he did so because he did not want the FBI to investigate him. Anyway, after all this time, an investigator named Nancy Fisher asked to see him at a restaurant. She told the family, "I will not investigate him or pressure him into anything. I want to eat some donuts and chat a little, but I have to talk to him because the subject is important, and maybe he will give us information that will lead us to the gang or solve other crimes." And indeed, what she wanted happened, and she met with Frederic, at the restaurant. Before the meeting, Nancy researched the subject of changing eye color and found studies that confirmed that this subject is impossible. Before Nancy went to meet Fred, she was absolutely certain that she would meet someone else, not the real Nicholas. Indeed, she was certain of everything the first moment she sat with him. When Fred sat in front of her, he had studied Nicholas's personality well and trained excellently to deal with the detective. But he forgot a simple and unexpected thing, and this was the clever mistake. When he sat in front of her, he had dyed his hair blonde a few days ago, and the hair had started to grow, making his black roots visible. The detective noticed this, and she also noticed that he was not blonde in the first place. But despite this mistake, Fred was very good at lying, and when she started talking to him, she began to be convinced that he was indeed Nicholas. She later said, "He was terribly convincing. Even his body language showed that he was honest and not lying." The only evidence the investigator had was the color of his hair and eyes. The meeting ended, and Nancy contacted Nicholas' mother directly and told her that this was not her son. But the mother categorically refused, and even refused to conduct any analysis to reveal his identity. She asked the investigator not to communicate with them in any way. Now, many questions must have come to your mind. Why did the mother refuse to meet the investigator in this way? And why was she so convinced that this was her son and not someone else? It is normal for people to mistake someone else for someone else, but the mother would not mistake her son. Most importantly, the pictures show that the resemblance between Nicholas and Fred is very weak. Or let's say there was no resemblance at all, and Nicholas' absence was 3 years. Is it possible that his appearance changed to this extent, so that his mother forgot about him? And is it possible that his family did not find the color of his eyes and hair strange, and did not feel anything strange? This was confusing to the investigator. Now let me tell you that what happened in our story is one thing, and what will come is another. Let me complete what happened to Fred, and I will answer all these questions soon. When the investigator noticed that the road ahead of her was blocked, she contacted the FBI, and when they investigated the matter, they discovered an additional difference between the two characters, which is the shape of the ear. Thus, the evidence settled the matter, and immediate intervention became necessary. They issued an arrest warrant for Nicholas lookalike, and he was arrested immediately. As soon as Frederic entered the police station, he confessed to everything. He didn't resist or beat around the bush. The man is used to it, and this wasn't the first time he was interrogated. He told them everything, and he was actually imprisoned. They sentenced him to 6 years in prison. But after this sentence, his case became a public opinion issue, and everyone demanded his release and said, "What you're doing to him is wrong." Of course, this happened because Fred was able to convince the press and public opinion that he was Nicholas, and that what was happening to him was a conspiracy between the police and his family, because they refused to let him return. At that time, the FBI was forced to reveal his identity and his entire file to the people, and everyone was shocked by the number of personalities he had played in his life and how many times he had been imprisoned. Now Fred is in prison. We'll get back to him in a moment. But let me tell you what happened to his family. When Detective Nancy told her colleague Charlie the story, he said, "This family must be hiding a secret, and they certainly weren't convinced that this was their son. So why are they keeping quiet about it? And everyone cares that their son is back and everything is fine." Here they decided to investigate the matter, but quietly and carefully, so that the Barclay family would not suspect anything. As soon as they started investigating, they noticed strange and mysterious behavior from the person we told you at the beginning of the video, whose name is Jason, Nicholas' older brother. When Nicholas lookalike returned after 3 years of disappearance, Jason's reaction was very uncomfortable. His family says that he was never happy with the news of his brother's return. On the contrary, he was nervous when he heard the news. As soon as Nicholas arrived, the whole family was waiting for him and celebrating. As for Jason, he traveled the day before to another city and never contacted his brother. After more than a month, after his family pressured him, he came to see his brother. He was clearly nervous and scared, but as soon as he saw his brother and greeted him, he was surprised and smiled, as if he knew that this was not his brother, but he did not say anything. On the contrary, he gave him a gift, and hours later, he left and never came back to see him again. Another thing, the investigators noticed that when Jason first disappeared, Nicholas called the police and told them that he saw his brother trying to break the garage door to enter the house. When the police arrived, he told them that he ran away and disappeared. The question here is, how did he appear and how did he disappear? And why did he try to break the door of the house in this way? And most importantly, why did Jason not approach his brother and talk to him? They told him, "This is your brother. If you saw him trying to break the door of the house and enter, you should have helped him and not reported him to the police." Indeed, the investigators Nancy and her colleague began investigating Jason officially. Throughout the investigation, he was confused, sometimes crying and saying, "I don't know anything, and I have nothing to do with anything, and I want a lawyer." In the end, they'd brought him a lawyer and were able to stop the investigation. But days later, before the second investigation session, investigator Nancy received news that Jason had died of a drug overdose. Thus, the only witness and suspect in the case of Nicholas' disappearance was gone. The investigator tried to investigate Nicholas' mother, and she was sure that she had important information. But unfortunately, she was unable to do anything because she did not have any evidence. Nicholas' mother was able to stop the investigation through her lawyer and claimed that her psychological state after losing her 2 children did not allow her to enter into an investigation. Unfortunately, the file was closed and Nicholas' case remained a mystery to this day. As for Frederic, after his prison term ended, he was deported to France in 2003, and there a few days later, Frederic Bourdin's identity disappeared and he appeared as a teenager named Ruben Sanchez. As usual, he was exposed and imprisoned, and his biography became the talk of the town, and he became famous in Europe and America. He continued to repeat the same methods until 2007. That year was the first time he decided to live with his real identity, thanks to the girl he met, loved, and married. Since then, he has vowed to turn the page on the past completely. Frederic Bourdin lives today in France with his family and 5 children. He has a TikTok account where he talks about his adventures, and he stated that he has impersonated more than 500 personalities in his life. When asked if he misses those days, he said that his goal in everything he did was to live in peace and feel the warmth of family. He always sought to sit at the same table with a family that included a father, mother, and brother. Today, he has a family, so he does not need to live with an identity other than his own. That was our story for today. I hope you liked it. See you in a new video.